Many empaths who experienced emotional loneliness as children carry a subtle, almost invisible imprint into adulthood. The world often didn't see their needs, their inner turmoil, or the quiet ways they tried to communicate distress. This absence of emotional mirroring in early life leaves them with deep, often unacknowledged patterns in how they perceive themselves and others. As adults, they may strive to fill that emptiness, sometimes seeking external validation, other times retreating into a private, self-contained emotional world. Understanding how childhood solitude shapes adult thinking is not about blame. It is about clarity, awareness, and the possibility of transforming patterns that were never consciously chosen. When we explore the thought patterns of empaths who grew up emotionally alone, we begin to see how early neglect subtly informs trust, intimacy, self-worth, and the ways in which they engage with the world. For many empaths, childhood emotional isolation leaves a lasting imprint on the way they think, perceive, and respond to the world as adults. From an early age, they may have learned that their emotional expressions did not elicit the responses they needed, that their cries for connection were overlooked, dismissed, or misinterpreted. This creates an internal narrative, often subtle and unconscious, that shapes not only their self-perception, but also the lens through which they interpret the intentions of others. They grow up internalizing the belief that their feelings are secondary, unworthy, or inconvenient to the adults around them. As a result, they develop a heightened sensitivity to the emotional climate of their environment, always scanning for cues of acceptance, rejection, or disinterest. This heightened awareness becomes a double-edged sword. It allows for deep empathy, an ability to sense others' needs, and an intuitive understanding of human emotion, but it also entrenches a chronic inner vigilance that never truly rests. In adulthood, this manifests as a continuous internal dialogue, a voice that constantly evaluates, questions, and measures emotional responses in both self and others. They may replay interactions repeatedly, analyzing what went wrong or what could have been done differently, striving for a sense of mastery over relational dynamics that was missing in childhood. This thinking pattern often involves what could be called anticipatory empathy, the habit of predicting other people's emotional states and tailoring behavior to avoid conflict or to gain approval. It is as if the mind is always rehearsing, adjusting, and preparing for scenarios in which emotional needs are either unmet or misinterpreted, reflecting an unconscious effort to create the safety and recognition that was absent in formative years. Alongside this, there is frequently a profound internal narrative regarding worthiness. Adult empaths who felt alone as children may question whether they are inherently lovable, whether their presence matters, and whether their emotions hold value. This questioning is rarely verbalized outwardly. It operates quietly, influencing choices in relationships, friendships, and professional life. Every interaction is subtly filtered through a lens forged in childhood absence, where trust must be earned cautiously and vulnerability is approached with both hope and fear. Furthermore, the internal monologue of these adults is often populated with self-instruction, a kind of running commentary that seeks to manage social behavior, anticipate emotional outcomes, and prevent the recurrence of rejection or neglect. They may tell themselves to soften their needs, to accommodate others, or to withhold parts of their emotional reality, believing that visibility will invite judgment or disappointment. Over time, this self-regulation becomes so ingrained that it feels natural, a necessary skill rather than a response to early neglect, making the link between past emotional solitude and present thinking patterns almost invisible to conscious awareness. Yet, these patterns are not merely defensive. They are adaptive responses that have allowed survival in emotionally unavailable environments. The mind has learned to self-soothe, to strategize, and to navigate complex social landscapes with precision born of necessity. Recognizing this is crucial, because it frames the thinking patterns not as flaws, but as survival mechanisms that carry both gifts and challenges. The adult empath may also develop heightened imaginative capacities, introspection, and creativity, all stemming from the need to fill the inner world with meaning, comfort, and narrative in the absence of external emotional attunement. Their thinking is often deeply layered, reflective, and nuanced, yet it can also be accompanied by a persistent sense of incompleteness or longing. Understanding this internal landscape allows for compassion toward oneself, a recognition of the deeply human need that went unmet in early life, and the opportunity to cultivate new ways of thinking and being that honor both sensitivity and resilience. In essence, the thinking patterns of adults who were emotionally alone as children are not random or irrational. They are the echoes of an early environment that shaped their mind to seek connection, understand emotion, and navigate a world that may not have always understood them. By observing these patterns with awareness, adults can begin to disentangle inherited responses from present realities, creating space for emotional growth, authentic connection, and self-acceptance, allowing the mind to transform its survival strategies into conscious choices rather than unconscious repetitions. Many empaths who experienced emotional loneliness as children carry into adulthood a persistent, often unspoken, drive to seek validation and recognition from the world around them. When a child grows up feeling unseen or unheard, the natural response of the psyche is to develop strategies to secure acknowledgement in ways that are both conscious and unconscious. These strategies often begin subtly, with small attempts to please, to anticipate the needs of others, or to achieve milestones that might elicit praise. Over time, these attempts evolve into a deeply ingrained mental pattern, a continuous internal monitoring system that asks, am I enough? Do I matter? Will anyone notice me if I don't prove my worth? For the adult empath, this internal search for validation is not merely about ambition or success. It is profoundly tied to the sense of self and the fear of invisibility. Each interaction, each social or professional exchange, can trigger an unconscious evaluation of worthiness, where the mind measures how well their actions, words, and presence are being received. This mental habit often manifests as overthinking, rehearsing conversations, or second-guessing behavior, as if each step must be calculated to ensure acknowledgement and approval. Because the early emotional environment was lacking, the adult empath may feel that validation is scarce, conditional, or difficult to obtain, leading to heightened sensitivity to feedback, both explicit and subtle. Even minor signs of disapproval or indifference can provoke significant inner turmoil, as the mind equates these cues with the emotional neglect experienced in childhood. At the same time, the search for recognition can create a duality in self-perception. On one hand, the empath may excel in empathy, understanding, and social intuition, developing remarkable interpersonal skills as a response to early isolation. On the other hand, they may feel chronically uncertain, perpetually questioning whether they are genuinely appreciated or simply tolerated. This duality drives many to overcompensate, striving to earn validation through achievements, acts of service, or extraordinary attentiveness to the needs of others. Yet, the emotional cost of this overcompensation is significant. Constantly seeking recognition externally can create a pattern where self-worth becomes dependent on outside approval, leading to cycles of anxiety, disappointment, and exhaustion. The adult empath may internalize the belief that love, respect, or attention must be earned, rather than experienced as a natural right of being. This internalized scarcity of acknowledgement fosters a hyper-awareness of social dynamics, as the empath continuously scans for signs that their presence is valued. It can also shape patterns of behavior in relationships, careers, and personal goals, often driving the individual toward environments where validation seems attainable, even if superficially. The search for recognition is not limited to adult relationships. It also echoes in creative and professional pursuits. Many empaths channel this need into work, art, or personal projects, seeking tangible evidence that their contributions matter. Yet, even success may feel insufficient if it does not translate into emotional resonance or acknowledgement from the right sources, reflecting the deep imprint of childhood experiences. Awareness of this internal pattern is the first step toward transformation. By recognizing that the relentless search for validation is rooted in unmet emotional needs, the empath can begin to differentiate between the echoes of past neglect and the reality of adult relationships. They can learn to nurture self-recognition, cultivating an inner sense of worth that does not rely solely on external reinforcement. This requires patience, self-compassion, and conscious practice in observing the habitual mental dialogue without judgment. With time, the empath can develop the ability to receive acknowledgement with openness rather than desperation, to value their own presence independently, and to participate in relationships without the constant fear of being unseen. Understanding the origins of this search for validation allows empaths to reinterpret their past experiences not as deficits, but as formative influences that shape their sensitivity, resilience, and capacity for deep connection. By bringing awareness to the mental patterns formed in response to childhood loneliness, they can begin to reclaim agency over their emotional life, choosing when and how to seek acknowledgement, and learning to provide it to themselves in ways that affirm their inherent worth and dignity. For empaths who felt emotionally alone as children, Their capacity for empathy often becomes both their greatest gift and their heaviest burden. From an early age, they learn to attune to the moods, needs, and unspoken cues of those around them, not because they are taught to, but because survival sometimes depends on it. When a child grows up without consistent emotional mirroring or acknowledgement, the mind naturally compensates by attuning to others, scanning for subtle signals that might indicate safety, danger, approval, or rejection. This attunement develops into a powerful ability to sense emotional states, intentions, and tensions in people and environments, often with uncanny accuracy. Yet, this very gift can also become a source of burden, as it constantly draws the empath into the emotional currents of others, sometimes at the cost of their own sense of self. The adult empath may find themselves absorbing the feelings, anxieties, or unresolved conflicts of those around them, experiencing them almost as if they were their own, because the mind has been trained from childhood to detect and respond to emotional cues in order to navigate neglect or instability. This internalized habit can make relationships both deeply rewarding and intensely draining, as the empath is simultaneously giving and receiving in ways that are invisible to others. The burden emerges because the empath's mind has been conditioned to prioritize the emotional landscape of others over their own internal reality. They may suppress their needs, minimize their discomfort, or ignore their own boundaries in order to maintain harmony or to avoid conflict, reflecting patterns learned in childhood when emotional safety was precarious or inconsistent. At the same time, the heightened sensitivity to emotions makes the empath acutely aware of injustices, unspoken tensions, or unacknowledged pain in their environment. They may carry an internal responsibility for smoothing interactions, protecting others from emotional harm, or preventing relational ruptures, often unconsciously taking on the role of emotional caretaker. This self-imposed role can create exhaustion, confusion, and a persistent feeling of imbalance, as the empath struggles to differentiate between their own feelings and those of the people around them. Moreover, the gift of empathy can lead to a paradoxical relationship with intimacy. The adult empath may desire deep connection, longing for relationships where their sensitivity is understood and reciprocated, yet they may simultaneously experience overwhelm when confronted with the intensity of others' emotions. They might withdraw, detach, or become vigilant in anticipation of emotional overload, reflecting an internal negotiation between the drive for connection and the instinct for self-preservation. The duality of empathy as gift and burden also extends to self-perception. While empaths often feel a profound sense of compassion and understanding for others, they may struggle with self-compassion, unconsciously believing that their role is to prioritize others' emotional needs over their own. This imbalance can manifest as guilt when asserting personal boundaries, anxiety when encountering conflict, or chronic exhaustion from constant emotional labor. Recognizing this pattern is essential because it reframes empathy not as a flaw to be corrected, but as a highly developed skill that has been honed under conditions of emotional scarcity. By becoming conscious of the ways in which their sensitivity can be both empowering and draining, empaths can begin to establish boundaries that honor their own needs while maintaining their capacity to connect deeply with others. They can learn to navigate the fine line between attunement and over-identification, choosing when to engage with others' emotions and when to step back, allowing space for self-care and emotional replenishment. This awareness also opens the door to healthier relationships, where the empath's gift of deep understanding is reciprocated and appreciated, rather than taken for granted or exploited. Ultimately, the dual nature of empathy, both gift and burden, reflects the adaptive intelligence of a mind shaped by early emotional solitude, a mind that developed profound sensitivity in order to survive and navigate a world that may not have always provided consistent emotional attunement. And by observing these patterns consciously, adult empaths can begin to transform their relationship with empathy into one that supports growth, resilience, and authentic connection. For empaths who grew up feeling emotionally alone, patterns of people pleasing and struggles with boundaries often emerge as central features of adult life. When a child's emotional needs are consistently unmet, the subconscious mind develops strategies to secure connection, acceptance, and safety, and one of the most common strategies is accommodation. The empath learns early that their own needs, desires, or discomforts may be ignored or dismissed, while responsiveness to the emotional or practical needs of others can elicit attention, approval, or conditional love. Over time, this strategy becomes internalized, forming habitual thought patterns and behaviors in which the empath prioritizes others' being above their own, often unconsciously suppressing self-expression or authentic responses. People-pleasing manifests in numerous ways, from agreeing to requests even when inconvenient or draining, to avoiding conflict, to tailoring opinions and behaviors to match the expectations of others. These patterns are reinforced by the implicit belief that acceptance is conditional, and that love or recognition must be earned rather than freely given. Alongside people pleasing, the empath frequently struggles with establishing and maintaining boundaries. Because early experiences taught them that asserting needs or saying no could provoke rejection or emotional withdrawal, many empaths carry a deep, seated fear of setting limits. Boundaries may feel unnatural or even guilt-inducing, as the mind has been conditioned to equate personal assertion with the risk of relational loss. This tension creates a recurring internal dialogue in which the empath negotiates between self-preservation and the desire to be seen, appreciated, and loved. In adult relationships, these dynamics often manifest in patterns of giving emotional overextension, or difficulty recognizing when others are taking advantage of their generosity. The empath may find themselves exhausted, frustrated, or resentful, yet struggle to identify the root cause, as the habitual prioritization of others' needs over their own has become deeply normalized. People-pleasing and boundary struggles are further complicated by the empath's acute sensitivity to social cues. Hyper-awareness of others' emotions makes it challenging to assert personal needs without fear of creating tension, discomfort, or disapproval. Even subtle signs of disappointment or irritation from others can trigger self-doubt, anxiety, or a renewed drive to accommodate, perpetuating the cycle. Professionally, these patterns can influence career choices and workplace dynamics. Empaths may gravitate toward roles in which service, caretaking, or collaboration are valued, often excelling at supporting others while neglecting self-care or recognition. Promotions, raises, or accolades may be perceived as secondary to maintaining harmony, reinforcing the internalized belief that visibility and validation are contingent on service rather than inherent worth. Understanding the origins of these patterns is crucial for transformation. Recognizing that people-pleasing and boundary struggles are adaptive responses to early emotional neglect reframes them not as character flaws, but as survival mechanisms designed to navigate relational scarcity. This awareness allows the adult empath to begin experimenting with new ways of interacting, learning to assert needs, communicate limits, and honor self-worth without fear of rejection. Therapeutic and reflective practices can facilitate this process by helping the empath observe habitual responses, explore underlying fears, and gradually expand the capacity for healthy boundary setting. Over time, the empath can cultivate relationships that respect mutual needs, where connection does not require self-sacrifice or constant accommodation, and where emotional reciprocity is possible. This process also involves cultivating self-compassion, acknowledging the courage it takes to challenge deeply ingrained patterns, and understanding that discomfort in asserting boundaries is a natural byproduct of rewiring neural and emotional habits established in childhood. As the empath becomes more skilled at balancing their own needs with the needs of others, the burden of people-pleasing diminishes, replaced by authentic engagement, emotional integrity, and the ability to connect deeply without losing oneself. In essence, the interplay of people-pleasing and boundary struggles reflects a mind shaped by early experiences of emotional scarcity, a mind that developed strategies to secure survival and connection, and by bringing awareness and intentional practice to these patterns, adult empaths can transform habitual over-accommodation into conscious, empowered relational choices for empaths who experienced emotional loneliness in childhood. The instinct for self-protection often becomes a central framework for how they navigate adult relationships. When a child's emotional needs are unmet, when expressions of vulnerability are ignored, minimized, or punished, the psyche naturally develops mechanisms to prevent further hurt. This early adaptation, while protective at the time, can carry into adulthood as deeply ingrained patterns of caution, vigilance, and emotional armor. Adult empaths may unconsciously monitor interactions, scanning for subtle cues of rejection, criticism, or abandonment, ready to retreat or adapt at the first hint of danger. Their self-protective strategies can take many forms, including emotional withdrawal, controlled disclosure, or the careful modulation of empathy to avoid overexposure. Often, these strategies are subtle and operate beneath conscious awareness. The empath may feel a vague tension or unease in social interactions without fully recognizing that their mind is actively regulating exposure to emotional risk. The need for self-protection is particularly evident in intimate relationships, where the stakes of vulnerability feel high. Having experienced emotional neglect or absence in formative years, the adult empath may struggle to fully trust that others can receive their inner world without judgment or rejection. They may erect boundaries that feel rigid or impenetrable, not as an act of hostility, but as a survival mechanism honed over years of practice. These protective patterns can manifest as cautious attachment, hesitancy to express feelings, or selective engagement with others' emotions. Even in friendships or professional settings, the empath may maintain a careful balance between connection and self-preservation, negotiating an internal dialogue that constantly evaluates risk versus reward. While self-protection is adaptive, it also carries costs. Over time, empaths may experience a sense of isolation, as the very mechanisms designed to preserve them emotionally can inhibit deep, authentic connection. The tension between the desire for closeness and the fear of being hurt creates a chronic inner struggle, where engagement with others is simultaneously sought and resisted. Awareness of these patterns is critical for transformation. By recognizing that protective behaviors are rooted in unmet childhood needs rather than inherent deficits, empaths can begin to differentiate between real threats and perceived risks based on past experiences. This recognition allows them to make conscious choices about when to engage, when to withdraw, and how to regulate emotional exposure without compromising authenticity. Therapeutic and reflective practices can support this process by helping the empath observe protective impulses, explore underlying fears, and gradually experiment with controlled vulnerability in safe contexts. Over time, the empath can expand their capacity for trust, learning that intimacy can be reciprocal rather than threatening, and that expressing emotional truth does not necessarily result in harm or abandonment. This shift does not eliminate caution entirely. Rather, it transforms it from an unconscious survival strategy into a conscious tool for navigating relationships with discernment. As the empath integrates these insights, the self-protective patterns evolve from rigid defenses into flexible skills that allow for connection without overexposure. Emotional attunement can coexist with boundaries, and empathy can be offered without self-sacrifice, reflecting a mature recalibration of the instincts developed in childhood. In this way, the adult empath learns to honor both their vulnerability and their resilience, engaging with the world from a place of awareness rather than reactive fear. The journey toward transforming self-protection into conscious relational strategy is ongoing, requiring patience, self-compassion, and repeated practice. Each step of mindful engagement reinforces the understanding that early loneliness shaped adaptive behaviors, and that these behaviors can now be redirected to support growth, connection, and authentic expression. By observing and consciously navigating their protective patterns, adult empaths can cultivate relationships that are both safe and fulfilling, where the depth of their sensitivity is celebrated rather than suppressed, and where the instinct for self-preservation is harmonized with the innate capacity for trust, intimacy, and emotional reciprocity. Childhood emotional loneliness can leave profound imprints, not only on how empaths relate to people, but also on the life choices they make, including career paths, creative pursuits, and broader life trajectories. When a child grows up feeling unseen or unheard, the mind develops patterns aimed at survival and fulfillment of unmet needs, and one of the ways this manifests in adulthood is through decision-making shaped by early emotional experiences, rather than purely conscious ambition. Many adult empaths are drawn to careers or roles where they can exert control over environments that once felt unsafe, or where they can provide care, support, or healing to others, reflecting the internalization of early relational scarcity. This might include professions in healthcare, counseling, education, or creative expression, where sensitivity and attunement are valued and rewarded, offering a compensatory sense of recognition that was absent in childhood. At the same time, career and life choices are often influenced by an unconscious desire to avoid situations reminiscent of emotional neglect or abandonment. An empath who once felt invisible may gravitate towards structured, predictable environments where the risk of relational rejection feels minimized, while another may seek environments that provide constant feedback and affirmation, attempting to fill the internal void created by unmet emotional needs. This can lead to patterns of perfectionism, overachievement, or relentless self-improvement, as the adult empath equates success or productivity with worthiness, believing that tangible accomplishments can validate their existence in ways that were denied in early life. Even outside professional contexts, life choices, such as relationships, living situations, and social circles, are often influenced by the imprint of early loneliness. Empaths may select partners who are emotionally available in appearance, but inconsistent in practice, reflecting a subconscious repetition of childhood experiences in an attempt to resolve unresolved longing. They may also avoid environments where vulnerability feels unsafe, gravitating towards solitude or selective companionship to protect against potential rejection. Creativity, too, often becomes a lifeline for empaths who were emotionally alone as children. The imagination becomes a space for expression, processing, and fulfillment that was missing in their formative years. Writing, art, music, or other forms of self-expression provide avenues to articulate feelings that were unacknowledged, to make sense of experiences, and to connect with others indirectly through shared human understanding. These creative pursuits are both therapeutic and strategic, offering a sense of visibility and acknowledgement that mirrors the validation sought in childhood. Awareness of the impact of early emotional isolation on adult choices is transformative. By recognizing that these patterns are adaptive responses, rather than arbitrary preferences or failures, empaths can begin to examine their life decisions with curiosity, rather than judgment. They can discern which choices genuinely reflect their authentic self, and which are motivated by unresolved needs for recognition, safety, or connection. Reflective practices, therapy, and mindful observation enable the adult empath to disentangle unconscious motivations from conscious intentions, allowing them to make decisions aligned with both personal fulfillment and emotional health. As empaths integrate this understanding, they may discover new avenues for engagement with the world, embracing paths that honor both sensitivity and self-determination. They can cultivate careers, relationships, and creative outlets that reflect their values and desires, rather than merely compensating for childhood emotional scarcity. This conscious reorientation does not erase the imprint of early experiences, but transforms it into a source of insight and guidance, turning past vulnerabilities into tools for growth and self-awareness. By observing the subtle ways in which childhood emotional loneliness has influenced life choices, adult empaths gain the capacity to navigate their trajectories with intentionality, ensuring that decisions are informed by awareness, self-compassion, and a deeper understanding of the interplay between past experiences and present desires. In this way, the influence of early loneliness is acknowledged without being determinative, and empaths learn to make life choices that reflect their authentic needs, values, and aspirations, cultivating both purpose and emotional well-being while honoring the profound sensitivity developed in response to early solitude. Empaths, who experienced emotional loneliness in childhood, often develop a heightened sensitivity to subtle emotional cues, a form of hypervigilance that persists into adult life. This hyper-awareness manifests as an acute perception of the moods, intentions, and unspoken feelings of others, allowing them to detect shifts in tone, body language, and energy that many people overlook. While this ability can be an asset, enabling deep connection and insight, it also creates a constant internal tension, as the empath's mind continually scans for potential threats, rejection, or emotional imbalance. This pattern of emotional hyper-vigilance is a direct echo of childhood experiences, when the empath learned to monitor their environment carefully in order to navigate neglect, unpredictability, or emotional unavailability. In adulthood, this vigilance often operates beneath conscious awareness, influencing interactions with friends, partners, co-workers, and even strangers. The empath may sense discord or emotional misalignment long before it becomes apparent to others, and they may carry an internal responsibility to mediate, anticipate, or manage emotional dynamics in an effort to maintain harmony or prevent conflict. While this sensitivity can foster profound relational insight and empathy, it can also be exhausting, leading to mental fatigue, anxiety, or difficulty distinguishing between their own feelings and those they absorb from others. Hyper-vigilance may manifest in various daily situations, from noticing micro-expressions in a conversation to sensing the unspoken tensions in a meeting or social gathering. The empath may rehearse interactions mentally, anticipating how others might react, adjusting behavior preemptively, or striving to prevent relational friction. This constant internal monitoring creates a dual experience of connection and burden. The empath feels deeply attuned, but also carries a persistent weight, as if the emotional environment depends on their careful navigation. Moreover, this hyper-awareness often extends to self-monitoring. Adult empaths may scrutinize their own emotional responses, questioning whether their reactions are appropriate, too intense, or too detached. They may filter their expressions, modulate their words, or suppress impulses to ensure that they do not disrupt relational equilibrium. reflecting a lifelong pattern of prioritizing others' emotional states over their own. In personal relationships, this heightened sensitivity can lead to both insight and overt responsibility. The empath may detect subtle signs of dissatisfaction or distress in a partner, prompting them to intervene, accommodate, or anticipate needs before being asked. While this attunement can foster closeness and understanding, it can also create imbalance, as the empath's own needs may be neglected or suppressed in the process. Awareness of hypervigilance is essential for transformation. By recognizing that constant emotional scanning is an adaptive response to early loneliness rather than an inherent flaw, the adult empath can begin to distinguish between necessary attentiveness and habitual overengagement. Mindfulness, reflective practices, and therapeutic support can help empaths observe when their sensitivity is serving connection and when it is amplifying anxiety or emotional overextension. Through conscious awareness, empaths can learn to filter and regulate the emotional information they absorb, choosing when to engage deeply and when to step back in order to preserve their own equilibrium. They can practice distinguishing their own feelings from those of others, cultivating the ability to respond from clarity rather than compulsion, and creating boundaries that honor both self and relational dynamics. As empaths integrate these practices, the burden of hyper-vigilance begins to shift into a source of conscious insight. They retain the capacity for deep attunement while reducing the unconscious drain that accompanies constant monitoring. Relationships can become more balanced, with emotional labor shared rather than shouldered alone, and personal boundaries respected without diminishing connection. The adult empath learns to navigate emotional landscapes with discernment, recognizing that while sensitivity is a gift shaped by early experiences of loneliness, it need not define or limit their capacity for ease, joy, or authentic engagement. In this way, hypervigilance transforms from a survival mechanism into a conscious tool, allowing empaths to engage with the world with both presence and protection, balancing attunement with self-care, and fostering relational and emotional resilience that honors the intelligence developed through childhood. Solitude pathways towards self-acceptance and emotional integration are perhaps the most transformative journey for empaths who experienced emotional loneliness as children. When early needs for recognition, validation, and emotional attunement were unmet, the inner landscape often became fragmented, with aspects of the self suppressed, denied, or undervalued. Adult empaths carry these echoes in their thoughts, behaviors, and emotional responses, and the process of self-acceptance requires a conscious commitment to witness, understand, and embrace all parts of themselves, including those shaped by childhood absence. The first step involves cultivating awareness of the habitual patterns that have governed their lives, the over-attunement to others, the people-pleasing tendencies, the hypervigilance, the self-protective behaviors, and the persistent internal dialogue questioning worthiness. By observing these patterns without judgment, empaths can recognize them as adaptive responses, survival mechanisms designed to navigate an emotionally scarce environment, rather than flaws or moral failings. This shift from judgment to understanding opens the door to self-compassion, allowing the empath to acknowledge the courage and resilience it took to survive emotional neglect, and to honor the ways they developed intelligence, intuition, and sensitivity as a result. Emotional integration is the next critical stage. This involves learning to connect with feelings that may have been suppressed or overlooked, naming them, feeling them fully, and understanding their origin. For many empaths, early emotional loneliness created a habit of dissociation or minimization of inner experience, a coping mechanism that allowed them to endure absence or neglect. Revisiting these suppressed emotions with care and curiosity allows them to reclaim parts of themselves that were previously fragmented or inaccessible. Practices such as reflective journaling, meditation, somatic awareness, or therapeutic exploration can facilitate this reconnection, providing structured ways to experience, process, and integrate emotions without being overwhelmed by them. Integration also requires the development of an inner dialogue that affirms worthiness independent of external validation. Empaths who grew up feeling unseen often internalized messages that their feelings, desires, or existence needed to be earned or were secondary to others' needs. Transforming this narrative involves consciously cultivating self-recognition, celebrating achievements, expressing needs, and allowing oneself to exist fully without constant justification. Gradually, this rewiring of the inner narrative shifts the empath from living primarily in response to external cues to inhabiting a more autonomous, grounded emotional reality. Another essential component is the cultivation of healthy boundaries and discernment in relationships. Self-acceptance does not mean indiscriminate openness. It involves the ability to engage with others while maintaining a sense of self, protecting emotional resources, and honoring personal limits. Emotional integration includes learning when to give, when to withdraw, and when to prioritize self-care, recognizing that boundaries are a form of self-respect and essential for sustainable connection. The journey towards self-acceptance is also enriched by practices that foster connection with supportive communities and relationships. Surrounding oneself with people who recognize, affirm, and respect emotional sensitivity creates a mirror that reinforces self-acceptance, allowing the empath to experience reciprocity rather than one-sided caregiving. Over time, these experiences help rewire relational expectations and reduce unconscious repetition of early patterns of neglect or conditional attention. Importantly, self-acceptance and emotional integration are not linear or final states. They are ongoing processes of observing, reflecting, and responding with awareness. Each moment of conscious recognition, each act of honoring one's feelings, each boundary set in alignment with self-respect, contributes incrementally to a life lived with integrity, authenticity, and resilience. Through these practices, adult empaths reclaim the parts of themselves shaped by childhood loneliness, transforming early emotional absence into a source of insight, strength, and conscious choice. They learn to navigate the world with sensitivity that is informed rather than overwhelmed by past experiences, cultivating a deep and abiding sense of worth, belonging, and emotional coherence that supports both personal fulfillment and meaningful connection with others.